I never thought a day would come when a bowl of hot soup would change the way I saw my family. I never imagined that something so small could shake the walls of a home I once believed was built with love. But life has a way of surprising us, especially when we least expect it. I still remember the smell of the soup that morning. It was a simple recipe, something I had made many times for my family, a warm chicken broth with a few vegetables. I cooked it the same way I always did, with slow movements and a quiet heart. But that day, everything felt different. The house felt heavier, the air felt colder, and the silence between me and my daughter-in-law felt sharp, almost like a blade. For months, things had been changing in our home. Not in loud ways, but in small, steady shifts, a door closing a bit harder, a sigh left unanswered, a conversation that ended sooner than it used to. It was the kind of silence that eats away at you slowly, like a soft wind that never stops. I tried to ignore it. I told myself she was tired or stressed or simply overwhelmed. She had a busy life, a demanding schedule, and a new marriage to adjust to. I kept telling myself that all relationships take time, all homes need patience, all mothers-in-law must learn to step back. I believed that with all my heart. But that morning, everything changed. I walked into the kitchen holding a small bowl of soup. I had made it for her because she wasn't feeling well the night before. Her head hurt. She said she needed rest, so I thought a warm meal would bring some comfort. A simple gesture from an older woman to the younger woman who had joined her family. When I placed the bowl on the table, she looked at it. Not with gratitude, not with curiosity, but with something I had never seen before. A mix of anger and exhaustion. She didn't say a word. She just stood there, her hands resting on the counter. And then, in one sharp motion, she pushed the bowl away. It slipped from the edge of the table and flew toward me. Hot broth splashed across my face and down my clothes. The bowl spun on the floor, clattering loudly against the tiles. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I didn't say her name. I just stood there, quiet, still. The soup was hot. It stung my skin. But the real pain came from somewhere deeper. Somewhere that had nothing to do with heat or broth or spilled vegetables. It came from the look in her eyes as she turned away, the look that said I didn't belong there anymore. In that moment, I felt something inside me shift. Not break, not collapse, just shift. Softly, quietly, like a leaf falling to the ground. I knew I had two choices, to walk away silently or to call someone who needed to hear the truth. I picked up my phone, and with one call, everything changed. My story doesn't begin with the soup. It begins much earlier, long before my son got married, long before the arguments, long before the quiet distance that slowly built between us over the years. I grew up believing in gentle homes. My own mother taught me that a house becomes a home only when people speak softly and listen deeply. She used to say, "A home is not built with walls. It is built with patience." Those words stayed with me all my life. When my son was born, I felt that patience growing inside me. He came into this world on a rainy evening, the kind of rain that taps softly against windows, almost like a lullaby. I held him close, and everything in me shifted. I decided that day that I would raise him with kindness and gentle words. He grew up fast. Children always do. One day they are reaching for your hand, and the next they are reaching for the world. Through every stage of his life, school, college, work, he remained soft-spoken and warm. He never raised his voice, even when life was difficult, and I took pride in that. When he told me he wanted to get married, I felt the same mix of joy and sadness that most mothers feel, a soft ache inside the heart, like the closing of one chapter and the beginning of another. He showed me her picture. She looked kind. Her eyes were bright, her smile gentle. I thought she would bring warmth into our home. Maybe she tried. Maybe life changed her. Maybe I misunderstood her. Maybe she misunderstood me. Families are complicated. Hearts are fragile. Words get lost. Feelings get hidden. And sometimes silence grows louder than any argument. I welcomed her with open arms. I prepared the house for her. I told myself I would give her space, freedom, respect. I would not be a burden. I would not interfere. I would not be the kind of mother-in-law who makes life heavy. But slowly, almost without noticing, the distance began, a closed door, a quiet dinner, a short reply, a cold good morning. It didn't happen all at once. It happened little by little, like a slow sunset you don't pay attention to until the sky has turned dark. And on the day she threw the soup, I realized how far apart we had drifted. The weeks leading up to the soup incident were filled with small moments that I tried to ignore. I kept telling myself that every home goes through phases. People change, circumstances shift, a little distance is normal. But deep inside, something in me knew that this wasn't ordinary distance. It felt heavier, almost like a slow cloud settling over the house. It began with conversations that ended too quickly. I would ask her how her day went, and she would respond with a single word, "Fine." Or I would ask if she needed help with anything, and she would shake her head without even looking at me. In the beginning, I brushed it aside. I told myself she was tired or stressed. Marriage brings its own adjustments. Two people learning to live under one roof is never easy, so I stepped back. I tried to give her all the space she needed, but then there were the small sighs, soft but sharp enough to cut through a room. If I entered the kitchen while she was making tea, she would quietly put things away as if she no longer wanted me there. If I sat in the living room, she would move to the bedroom and close the door. Whenever my son came home from work, she would talk to him in whispers, glancing toward me as if I had done something wrong. I tried to approach her gently once. I was standing near the window folding a few towels when she walked past me. She looked tired, and her eyes had a kind of restless sadness in them. "Are you all right?" I asked softly. "You seem a little upset these days." She paused, but only for a second. "I'm fine," she said again. Though her voice felt cold, I nodded, trying not to push her any further. I didn't want to create pressure. I didn't want to add to whatever she was feeling, but something inside me ached. That softness that once existed between us had slowly turned into a thin wall that neither of us crossed. My son noticed it too, though he never said anything directly. He would come home tired, place his bag on the table, and look at both of us with a quiet confusion. He asked once, "Is everything okay?" But she quickly responded, "Everything is fine," and that was the end of it. I didn't want to trouble him. I didn't want to burden his heart or add weight to his marriage, so I kept quiet. Silence became my companion. I carried it with me through every room in the house, but sometimes silence speaks louder than words. There were also moments when the distance felt almost intentional, like the time I made tea for everyone. She looked at the cup and pushed it aside. "I'll make my own," she said, or the time I was cleaning the dining table and she told me, "You don't have to do that." Her tone was sharp enough to make me stop mid-motion. I remember sitting on my bed at night, staring at the ceiling fan spinning gently above me. I kept wondering where things went wrong. Had I said something unintentionally? Had I stepped into her space without realizing it? Had she grown tired of sharing a home with me? I thought of calling my sister once, just to talk, just to pour my heart out, but I stopped myself. I didn't want to sound like I was complaining about my daughter-in-law. I didn't want anyone to see her differently because of my hurt feelings, so I kept everything inside. Over time, even the simplest moments became heavy. One afternoon, she was in the kitchen preparing lunch. I walked in quietly and asked if I could chop the vegetables for her. She didn't look up. "No, it's fine," she said. Her voice wasn't angry. It was distant, as if I were a stranger she had tolerated for too long. I reached for a glass of water, but as I did, she closed the fridge door with a bit more force than necessary. The sound echoed in the empty kitchen. The house didn't feel like my home anymore. It felt like a place I was visiting, a place where I was careful not to make too much noise or take too much space. I missed the warmth we had in the beginning. I missed the days when she would ask me for a recipe or sit with me while we watched a show together. I missed the small laughs we once shared over silly things. That girl had disappeared. Or maybe she was still there, buried under layers of stress or resentment I couldn't understand. Still, I tried my best to keep the peace. I stayed quiet. I moved gently. I avoided stepping into her routines. But pain has a way of piling up slowly, like dust settling in corners you don't notice until the light hits it just right. The turning point before the soup happened 3 days earlier. She and my son had an argument, not loud but tense. Their voices echoed faintly down the hallway. I didn't want to eavesdrop, but some words reach your ears even when you try to avoid them. "You don't understand," she said in a shaking voice. "You're too sensitive," he replied softly. There was a pause. Then her voice again. "She doesn't get me either." My heart froze. She could only mean me. I sat on the edge of my bed, hands clasped tightly, listening to the distant murmur of their disagreement. My son sounded tired, almost worn out. She sounded frustrated, like she had been carrying something heavy on her shoulders for too long. I couldn't hear every word, but I heard enough to understand that something in her heart had shifted toward me. That night, the dinner table felt colder than usual. She barely spoke. My son kept looking between us, unsure of what to say. I made her favorite dish, hoping it might lighten her mood. She took one bite, put the spoon down, and said she wasn't hungry. She walked away quietly, leaving her plate untouched. I didn't say anything, but a part of me cracked inside. A soft, quiet crack that no one could hear but me. The next morning, she woke up with a headache. Her eyes were swollen, as if she hadn't slept well. She didn't speak much. She just moved through the house like a shadow. I felt sorry for her. I wanted to ease her burden somehow, so I made the soup, a simple gesture, a small offering, a peaceful thought. But sometimes, even the gentlest acts land on hearts that are already hurting. And when a heart is hurting, even kindness feels heavy. I carried the bowl to her with the hope that it might comfort her. Instead, it became the moment everything broke, not because of the soup, not because of the heat, but because of the pain behind her eyes when she threw it. That pain was deeper than I ever imagined, and I didn't know then. But the call I made afterward would change not only her life, but mine too. After the soup splashed across my face, I remember the warmth turning into a sting. I blinked slowly, letting the heat settle on my skin. My hands trembled, but not because of the burn. It was the shock, the sadness, the heaviness that wrapped itself around my chest. I held the edge of the table for balance, trying to find my breath. She didn't come toward me. She didn't ask if I was hurt. She didn't look back. She simply turned away and walked into the bedroom, shutting the door with a quiet firmness that felt louder than any shout ever could. I stood there for a long moment. The kitchen smelled of broth. The floor was dotted with carrots and tiny pieces of chicken. The bowl lay on its side, spinning slowly before coming to a stop. I wiped my face with the end of my dupatta and felt a strange mixture of warmth and coldness at the same time. I wasn't angry. I wasn't shocked. I was tired. Tired in a way I'd never felt before. Tired of trying, tired of guessing, tired of walking softly in a home that no longer felt like home. I bent down and picked up the bowl. My fingers brushed the warm ceramic. I rinsed it gently under the tap, watching the water wash away every trace of what had just happened. I moved slowly, almost mechanically, as if my body knew what to do even though my heart felt hollow. I cleaned the floor. I gathered the fallen vegetables. I wiped the tiles carefully. It felt strange, cleaning up the pieces of something that was never meant to break. When I finished, I sat at the small dining table. I placed my hands on my lap and stared at the quiet kitchen. The ceiling fan turned in slow circles, humming softly above me. Outside, a bird chirped once and then went silent again. I waited for her to come out. I waited for her to say something. I waited for her to look at me. But minutes passed. 10 minutes, 20, 40, nothing. The silence of that closed bedroom door felt heavier with each passing second. I began to wonder if this moment was the result of everything she had been carrying inside. Maybe the soup wasn't about the soup. Maybe it was her frustration, her exhaustion, her unspoken fears, her misunderstandings, her bottled feelings, all pouring out in one sharp motion. Maybe I wasn't the reason, or maybe I was, but neither of us had ever sat down to talk. And when people don't talk, feelings twist into shapes that don't even make sense anymore. I slowly reached for my phone. My hands were still shaking, not out of anger but out of sadness. I didn't know who I was calling at first. I just knew I needed someone to hear my voice. I needed someone who would understand. But before dialing, I set the phone down gently. I wanted to give myself a moment. I wanted to breathe. So I stood up and walked toward my room. The corridor felt longer than usual. My footsteps echoed softly against the floor. I could hear faint sounds from the bedroom she was in, the rustle of clothes, a small sigh, the soft thump of her sitting on the bed. When I reached my room, I closed the door behind me and sat at the edge of the mattress. The room felt cool and peaceful, but inside me everything felt unsteady. I folded my hands in my lap and closed my eyes. I remembered the early days of her marriage, how she used to help me in the kitchen, how she liked the way I made tea, how she once stood next to me and said, "Ami, your food tastes like comfort." That sentence had stayed with me, warm and gentle, tucked somewhere deep inside my heart. What happened to that girl? What happened to the warmth we once shared? I opened my eyes and stared at the window where soft sunlight filtered in. Dust particles floated in the air like tiny stars. I watched them for a while, letting my breathing settle. After a few minutes, I heard the bedroom door open down the hall. Her footsteps moved to the living room. There was a pause. Then silence again. She didn't come toward my room. She didn't knock. She didn't ask if I was okay. I waited 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5, still nothing. I wasn't expecting an apology. I wasn't expecting sudden softness. But I'd hoped for at least a small acknowledgement that something had happened, something real, something painful. But maybe she had reached a place where acknowledging me felt heavier than silence. I finally picked up my phone again. I didn't scroll through contacts. I didn't think too long. My fingers moved on their own. I called someone who needed to hear the truth, not to complain, not to accuse, but because the silence had become too much to bear. Before the phone rang, I whispered to myself, "This is not to hurt anyone, this is just to breathe." And then the line connected. The person I called was my older sister. She had always been the one I could speak to without fear. She understood the pauses in my voice. She understood the things I never said out loud. When she answered, her voice carried the same softness it always had. "Hello? Are you all right?" For a moment I couldn't speak. The words sat heavy in my throat. I let out a small breath and she immediately knew something was wrong. "What happened?" she asked gently. I didn't want to break down. I didn't want to sound weak. So I started slowly, choosing simple words. "There was an incident," I whispered. "Something happened today." Her voice softened even more. "Take your time, I'm listening." And for the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to speak honestly. I told her everything from the beginning, the small shifts, the cold glances, the distance that grew like a quiet vine across the house. I told her about the silence, the tension, the feeling of no longer belonging in my own home. She didn't interrupt, she didn't gasp, she didn't judge. She just listened with the kind of patience only an older sister can give. When I finally reached the moment where the soup hit my face, my voice trembled. Not because it hurt physically, but because saying it out loud made the wound inside me feel real. There was a long pause on the other side of the line. "Did she really do that?" my sister asked softly. "Yes," I replied. "She didn't mean to, maybe, I don't know. She's been so distant, so stressed. I don't want to think the worst of her." My sister sighed quietly, a sigh that held both pain and understanding. "You didn't deserve that," she said. "No matter how upset she was, that wasn't right." Her words felt like a hand placed gently over mine, steady, calm, reassuring. "I know," I whispered back, "but I'm not angry at her. I'm just lost." That word felt true, lost. I wasn't looking for revenge. I wasn't looking for confrontation. I was looking for air, for clarity, for someone to tell me that I wasn't imagining the heaviness I felt every day. My sister stayed silent for a few seconds, then said, "She's going through something. I can hear it in everything you told me, but you shouldn't keep this inside. You should talk to your son." I closed my eyes. My heart sank. I had feared she would say that. "I don't want to trouble him," I whispered. "He works so hard, he's already tired." "I understand that," she replied gently, "but he has a right to know. You're his mother. You're living in that house too. Your pain matters." Her words were warm, but they carried truth, a truth I had avoided facing. I leaned back against the headboard and stared at the ceiling, trying to imagine how I would tell him. The thought alone made my chest tighten. "What if he misunderstands?" I asked. "What if he thinks I'm trying to create problems between them?" "That won't happen," she said softly. "He knows your heart, and if he doesn't know what you're going through, how will anything ever change?" I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I let her words sink into the quiet air of my room. She wasn't wrong, but the fear of being seen as the reason for their marital tension haunted me. She broke the silence again. "Even if you don't want to tell him everything right now," she said, "you need someone who can support you. You can't handle this alone." Her voice cracked a little. It was the kind of break that shows love, not weakness. "When you talk with love," she whispered, "the truth never destroys a home. Hiding it might." Her words stayed with me long after the call ended. We spoke a little longer. She asked if I was physically okay. She reminded me to wash my face with cold water. She told me she was there for me, even if all I needed was someone to sit with me in silence. Before ending the call, she said something that settled in my heart like a soft blanket. "You don't have to fight anyone," she said. "Just don't fight yourself. I hung up and placed the phone beside me. The room felt both heavier and lighter at the same time. The pain was still there, but now it had a witness. Someone who saw me. Someone who cared. I wiped my face again, though the soup was long gone, but the memory of it lingered like a warm imprint on my skin. Then I heard the sound of footsteps outside my door, slow, hesitant, almost uncertain. For a moment my heart lifted. I thought it might be her. I thought she might knock. I imagined her opening the door only a little, standing there with lowered eyes, and saying something, anything. But the footsteps stopped near the living room, and then faded away. No knock came. I looked at the closed door of my room and realized something important. This wasn't just a moment of anger from her. It wasn't just stress. Something deeper was happening in her heart, something she hadn't shared with anyone, something that had pushed her to the edge where even a bowl of soup felt like a burden too heavy to hold. I didn't want to be another weight on her chest, but I also couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. That night, I decided I would speak to my son. I looked at the closed door in front of me, imagining him sitting somewhere far away with worry settling over his face. "Your wife and I had a misunderstanding," I whispered. Another pause, a longer one. "I see," he said slowly. "Did something happen?" I could hear the struggle in his voice. He wanted to know, but he didn't want to assume. He wanted to support me, but he didn't want to blame her without understanding, so I told him a gentler version of the truth. Not every detail, not the pain in my chest, not the long silence afterward, not the way I cleaned the floor with trembling hands. I only told him that she had been stressed, and something slipped from her hand and it fell on me. I didn't want to create a crack between them. I just wanted him to know that I wasn't feeling steady. When I finished, he didn't speak for a few moments. "Ami, she threw it, didn't she?" he asked quietly. My heart tightened. He knew me too well. I didn't answer. Silence sometimes tells truths that words avoid. I heard him inhale deeply. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "No," I said, my voice softening. "I'm fine." The worry in his breathing told me he didn't believe I was completely fine, but he respected that I wasn't ready to say more. "I'll come home early," he said. "No," I replied quickly. "Don't do that, it's okay. She's going through something. We both need space today." He didn't argue, but his silence told me he wasn't convinced. I softened my tone again. "I'm not upset with her," I added. "Please don't be either. She didn't mean it." He let out a long breath, the kind people release when they're holding back emotions. "Ami, I'll talk to her, gently, I promise." I nodded, even though he couldn't see it. "Just listen to her, that's all she needs." "Are you sure you're all right?" he asked again. "Yes," I whispered. "I just needed to hear your voice." He stayed quiet for a moment, then said, "I'll call you again after dinner. Please rest." We ended the call, and I held the phone in my hands for a while, feeling the warmth of his concern settle slowly inside me. It was comforting, but it also made me worry. Worry about how the evening would unfold. Worry about the weight my words might carry. I didn't want my son to see his wife as someone who harmed his mother. I didn't want him to feel torn. Marriage is delicate, and a mother's presence in that marriage must be gentle, not heavy. I sat there in the dimming light, the sky turning from gold to soft gray outside my window. The walls of my room felt like they were leaning in, holding my feelings with me. Then I heard the main door open. My son had come home earlier than usual. My heart began to beat a little faster. Not out of fear, but out of uncertainty. I didn't know how this would unfold. I didn't know what he would say to her. Low, almost careful. Then hers. Quiet, fragile, like a thin piece of glass that might break if pressed too hard. I couldn't hear the words, just the tones, and in those tones I sensed something shifting, something neither of them had dared to speak until now. There was a long silence after that, then footsteps. 2 sets, moving toward my side of the house. I held my breath. Someone stopped right outside my door. But no one knocked, not yet. I stood there for a long time, holding the edge of the counter to steady myself. The kitchen felt cold. The air felt heavy. I could hear the clock ticking in the living room, each sound stretching across the silence like a reminder of how slow pain can move. After a while, I washed the sauce off my hands and face. I didn't scrub too hard. I didn't rush. I just moved slowly, almost carefully, as if I was trying not to break again. When I finally sat down at the small table near the window, I kept my hands folded together. They were still shaking. I remember thinking, I should call my son. but right after that thought came another one. He might not believe me. Those two thoughts pushed against each other inside my mind, and I felt smaller than I had in years. I wondered how things had reached this point. I wondered when love had become fear, and when respect had turned into something she felt she could throw away. A small part of me kept whispering, maybe she didn't mean it. Maybe she was just upset. Maybe I said something wrong. But deep inside, I knew the truth. She didn't slip. She didn't shout and lose control. She made a choice. Still, I sat there, trying to understand, trying to find a reason that would hurt less. The evening drifted on. The sky outside turned darker and the house grew quieter. I kept waiting for her to come back and say something, anything, even a soft apology, even a simple explanation. But no one came into the kitchen. I could hear her walking around, but she didn't approach me. After an hour, I stood up and went to my room. I closed the door gently, not wanting to add more noise to a home that already felt divided. I sat on the bed and stared at the wall. My heart felt like it was resting behind a thin sheet of glass. One small tap and it would break again. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept turning from one side to the other. I replayed everything in my mind. I tried to trace back my words. I tried to imagine her face when she looked at me. I wondered why her eyes had held so much frustration. When morning came, I felt drained, but I forced myself to get up. I walked to the kitchen to make tea and found her standing there already. She didn't look at me. She didn't greet me. She just reached for a cup and filled it with water. Even then, I gave her a chance. I said softly, "Good morning." She didn't answer. She only moved aside as if the space between us was something she needed to step around. And that small moment, just that quiet refusal, hurt more than the soup on my face. Later that day, I sat in the living room with my purse beside me. I thought about leaving. I thought about packing quietly and walking out without saying a word. But a part of me still hoped she would come and talk to me, even if it was uncomfortable. Instead, she called out from the hallway, her voice sharp and flat. She said, "If you want to leave, then leave. The door is right there." The words didn't shock me, but hearing them out loud broke something in me. I stayed silent. I kept my eyes on the floor because I didn't want her to see the pain in them. I knew she would think it was weakness. After a few minutes, I picked up my phone. My hand trembled a little as I dialed my son's number. I didn't plan to tell him everything. I just wanted to hear his voice. I wanted to remind myself that I wasn't alone. He answered on the second ring. "Ami?" he said with a warmth that almost made me cry. I swallowed and tried to speak normally. "Yes, Beta, I just wanted to check on you." There was a long pause and then he asked, "Is everything okay?" I wanted to say yes. I wanted to protect him from the truth, but my voice didn't listen to me. It cracked when I said, "I'm fine, I think." He immediately knew something was wrong. "Ami, what happened?" For the first time, I let the silence speak. He waited, patient and steady, until I finally said the words I had been holding back. "She threw soup at me." He didn't speak for a few seconds. I could hear his breath get sharper. "What?" His voice was low, controlled, but full of disbelief. "I'm okay," I said quickly, "don't worry." He didn't listen to that part. He didn't believe the calmness I tried to force. He said, "I'm coming right now." And just like that, with one call, the air around me shifted. Something inside me that had been tight for so long began to loosen. I didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time that day, I didn't feel alone. I sat there with the phone still in my hand, feeling the quiet settle around me again. But this time, the silence didn't feel as heavy. Just knowing my son was on his way gave me a small sense of comfort I had been longing for. It felt like someone had finally opened a window in a room that had been closed for too long. I could breathe a little easier. I didn't tell her he was coming. I didn't move from my spot on the couch. I just sat there, letting the reality of everything sink in. Part of me wondered if I had done the right thing. Another part whispered that every mother deserves to be treated with dignity, especially in her own son's home. Minutes passed slowly. I kept listening for footsteps outside. I kept glancing at the door, waiting for it to open. My mind drifted back to the moment she threw the soup at me. I had replayed it so many times that now it felt like a scene from someone else's life. A scene I wished I could erase. I heard her walking around in the hallway, still avoiding me. She didn't ask why I looked shaken. She didn't ask what had happened after she walked away. She acted as if nothing had happened. That hurt in a different way. Sometimes indifference cuts deeper than anger. After what felt like an hour, I finally heard the familiar sound of a car pulling up outside. My heart started beating faster. I sat up straight, wiped the corner of my eyes, and tried to look calm. I didn't want my son to see me like that. Even after everything, I still wanted to protect him from the weight of my pain. The door opened, and he walked in quickly, looking around with worry written all over his face. "Ami," he said softly, almost like he was afraid I might break if he raised his voice. I looked up at him, and the moment our eyes met, everything I had been holding inside spilled into that one glance. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. A mother doesn't need words for her child to feel her hurt. He sat beside me and held my hand, his fingers closed around mine, warm and steady, giving me strength without saying anything. That simple touch made my heart feel lighter. He whispered, "Tell me what happened." I didn't want to make him angry. I didn't want to cause more problems between him and his wife, but I also couldn't lie. "She was upset," I said slowly, trying to choose my words carefully. "We had a small misunderstanding in the kitchen. I said something, maybe the wrong way, and she reacted." "A misunderstanding?" he repeated. "Ami, you're shaking. This wasn't a small thing." I looked down at my hands. They were folded tightly in my lap. She threw hot soup at me. For a moment he didn't move. His whole body went still, as if he needed a second to understand. Then he let out a breath and ran his hand across his forehead, trying to stay calm. "Where is she?" he finally asked. "She's in the room," I whispered. Before he could get up, I touched his arm. "Beta, don't start a fight, please." He nodded, but I could tell he was holding a storm inside him. A storm he was trying very hard to control because I asked him to. He stood up and walked toward the hallway. I sat there, listening to every sound. His footsteps grew faint, and then I heard a soft knock. He was trying to be respectful even now. Even after what she had done, her voice came from behind the door. "Yes?" He didn't raise his voice. He didn't shout. He simply said, "We need to talk." There was a long silence, then the sound of the door opening. I stayed where I was, staring at the floor, listening to the soft, muffled conversation. I didn't want to hear the words. I didn't want to know how she would explain it. I didn't want to relive the moment again. But even from a distance, I felt his disappointment. It floated through the air like a quiet ache. It wasn't anger. It was something deeper, something heavier. After a few minutes, he came back into the living room. He sat down beside me again, but this time he looked tired. Older. As if the weight on his shoulders had doubled in just a short time. "Ami," he said gently, "you're coming with me." I looked at him with surprise. "Beta, I don't want to trouble you." "You're not a trouble," he said, and there was a firmness in his voice that made my eyes fill with tears. "You're my mother." I wanted to protest. I wanted to say I was fine. I wanted to pretend the house still felt like a home, but I couldn't bring myself to lie. Not anymore. I nodded slowly. He stood up and helped me gather my things. Not much, just a small bag with a few clothes. Before leaving, I turned once and looked at the kitchen door, the same one I had walked through so many times with hope and warmth. This time, all I felt was the faint shadow of something that used to be. We stepped outside together. The air felt different, lighter, safer. I took a deep breath and whispered, "Thank you, Beta." He looked at me with soft eyes. "You should never feel unwanted in your own family." And with those words, we walked to the car, leaving behind a house where my heart had broken, but where I refused to let it stay. The ride to his place was quiet, but not the painful kind of quiet. It was the kind that lets you breathe, the kind that gives your heart a little space to settle again. I looked out the window as we drove, watching the streets pass by slowly. Every turn felt like I was leaving a little piece of that hurt behind. My son kept glancing at me from time to time, making sure I was okay. He didn't rush me to talk. He didn't push for details. He just drove, steady and calm, giving me the comfort I didn't realize I needed. When we reached his home, he helped me out of the car like I was fragile. I wasn't old enough to need help, but at that moment, his care made me feel seen. He opened the door for me, led me inside, and said, "Make yourself comfortable, Ami. This is your home, too." I sat on the sofa, feeling a warmth that had been missing for a long time. The house was calm, peaceful, no sharp words, no cold glances, no tension hiding in the corners, just a gentle silence that wrapped around me like a blanket. My son went to the kitchen to make tea. I could hear the soft clink of cups, the sound of the kettle starting to boil. simple sounds, but they made me feel safe. They reminded me of the old days, when he was a little boy and would follow me around the kitchen, asking questions about everything. When he returned with 2 cups of tea, he sat down beside me and placed 1 cup in my hands. The warmth traveled through my fingers and into my chest. For a long moment we just sipped our tea quietly. Then he said, "I'm sorry you had to go through that." I shook my head slowly. "It's not your fault, Beta." He looked away for a second, his eyes heavy. "She shouldn't have done that. No matter what." I didn't know what to say. I didn't want him to feel torn between us. I didn't want to add more weight to his heart. "Maybe she was upset," I said gently. "Maybe something built up over time." He sighed. "Even then, you don't treat someone like that, especially not the woman who raised your husband." His voice wasn't loud, but it carried a deep disappointment, a kind of sadness that sits quietly in the corner of a room. After a few minutes of silence, he asked, "Ami, do you want to rest for a while?" I nodded. The emotional weight of the past day was catching up to me. He led me to the guest room. It wasn't fancy, but it was warm and tidy. The bed was made neatly, and there was a small lamp on the side table. He put my bag down and said, "If you need anything, I'm right here." As I lay down, I felt a kind of exhaustion that wasn't just physical. It was the slow, deep tiredness that comes after your heart has been carrying something too heavy for too long. I closed my eyes, and for the first time since the incident, I felt myself drifting into a peaceful sleep. When I woke up a few hours later, the evening light was pouring softly into the room. I stretched a little, trying to shake off the heaviness. When I stepped out into the living room, I found my son sitting on the sofa, staring thoughtfully at the floor. He looked up when he heard me. "Ami, come sit," he said. I sat beside him, and he took a deep breath. "I talked to her again," he said quietly. My heart tightened. "And?" He paused. "She said she didn't mean to throw it. She said she was frustrated, but she didn't apologize." My chest sank a little. Even after everything, part of me had hoped she would feel some regret. "She asked if you're coming back," he continued. "I wasn't sure how to react. And what did you say?" "I told her," he began, speaking slowly, "that until she understands how much she hurt you, you're staying with me." There was a long silence after that. I didn't know whether to feel relief or sadness, perhaps a mix of both. My son leaned back slightly and looked at me. His eyes were gentle but firm. "Ami, I want you to be somewhere you feel respected. I won't force you to go back, not until you want to." His words settled deep inside me. They didn't erase the hurt, but they soothed it. That night, after dinner, we sat together and talked about small things. Old memories, childhood moments, times when life felt simpler. His laughter filled the room, and with each smile I felt a small part of my heart healing. Later, when I went to bed, I lay there thinking about everything that had happened, the hurt, the shock, the embarrassment, but also the love my son had shown, the way he stood up for me, the way he quietly opened a space for me to heal. I still didn't know what the future held. I didn't know if things would ever be the same again. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't standing alone, and sometimes that's enough to start healing. The next morning, sunlight filtered gently through the curtains. I woke up slowly, my mind still wrapped in the quiet comfort of the night before. For a moment, I lay there listening to the peaceful stillness of the house. No tension, no hurried footsteps, no heavy sighs from the hallway. It felt like my heart could finally rest. I got up and stepped out into the living room. My son was already awake, sitting at the dining table with a cup of tea. When he saw me, he smiled softly. "Good morning, Ami." I returned the smile. "Good morning, Beta." He asked if I slept well, and I nodded. I didn't tell him how comforting it felt to sleep without fear of being judged. I didn't tell him how safe the silence felt. Sometimes feelings don't need long explanations. A simple nod is enough. He poured me tea and placed the cup in front of me. I watched the steam rise in slow curls, and something about that simple sight made my chest warm. These small gestures, the cup of tea, the gentle tone, felt like stitches, slowly mending something inside me. We sat quietly for a while, then he said, "Ami, I've been thinking." I looked up at him. His expression was thoughtful, a little worried but steady. "You don't have to hurry back," he said softly. "Stay as long as you want, even if it's forever." His words touched something deep inside me. I felt a soft ache, the kind that comes from being loved in a way you had almost forgotten. But I didn't want to answer right away. My heart was still bruised, and decisions made with a bruised heart are often heavy ones. "I need a little time, Beta," I said quietly. "Just a little." He nodded. "Take all the time you need." Later that afternoon, I stepped outside for a short walk. The air was cool, and the neighborhood was calm. As I walked, I thought about everything that had led to this moment. I asked myself if I had missed signs, if I had overlooked little cracks forming in the relationship between me and my daughter-in-law. Maybe I had tried too hard to keep peace. Maybe she had struggled in her own way and never said it out loud. But even with all those thoughts, one truth stayed clear in my mind. No matter what the misunderstanding was, no one deserves to be treated with that kind of disrespect. When I returned to the house, my son was on the phone. He sounded calm but firm. I didn't want to interrupt, so I sat quietly on the sofa. A few minutes later, he joined me. "That was her," he said gently. I stayed quiet, bracing myself for what he would say next. "She wants to talk to you." My hands grew cold. A part of me wasn't ready. My heart wasn't steady enough yet. But I also knew that avoidance only stretches pain. Sometimes a small conversation can close a wound before it grows deeper. "Not yet," I whispered. "I need a little more time." He nodded with understanding. He didn't pressure me. He didn't push. He simply said, "When you're ready, I'll be here." That evening, as the day softened into night, I sat near the window with a light shawl wrapped around me. The street lights outside flickered on, one by one. Children played in the distance. A gentle breeze brushed against the glass. I thought about forgiveness. Not for her sake, but for my own peace. I wasn't ready to forgive yet, but I was ready to start breathing again. My son cooked dinner and called me to the table. The food wasn't fancy, just simple comfort, rice, lentils, and a little salad. But it tasted like care, like sincerity, like a reminder that love doesn't need big gestures to be felt. After dinner, we sat together and talked about everyday things, his work, his plans, small memories from childhood. These little conversations were the quiet threads that held us together. That night, when I lay down to sleep, I felt something shift inside me. The pain was still there, but it wasn't as sharp. The hurt was still alive, but it wasn't drowning me anymore. My heart felt a little steadier, a little stronger than the day before. I knew there were still steps ahead, conversations to be had, wounds to face, and maybe, one day, forgiveness to offer. But for now, I allowed myself to rest in the small comfort of a safe place, and a son who stood by me when I needed him the most. Sometimes healing doesn't arrive all at once. It comes gently, like morning light, slow, quiet, but certain. And that night, as sleep finally pulled me in, I felt that gentle light settling softly in my heart. The next morning, I woke up feeling a little stronger. The tension that had weighed on my chest for days had loosened just enough for me to breathe without fear. I made my way to the living room, where my son was quietly reading at the table. He looked up and smiled softly. "Good morning, Ami," he said. "Good morning, Beta," I replied, trying to sound steadier than I felt. He gestured toward the sofa. "Sit, let's have some tea." As I poured the warm liquid into my cup, I realized something. It wasn't just the tea that comforted me. It was the normalcy, the simple routine, the quiet care that had been missing in the house for so long. For the first time in days, I felt a little hope. After breakfast, my son said gently, "I think it's time to talk to her. Not in anger, not to blame, just talk." I hesitated. My chest tightened. A part of me wanted to avoid it forever, but another part knew that avoiding her would never give me peace. I needed this moment. I needed to stand and face what had happened, not out of anger, but to reclaim my dignity and calm my heart. He guided me toward the hallway. I could hear her in the kitchen, moving around. She didn't look at me when we stepped inside the room. Her eyes were fixed on the counter. Her hands fidgeted with a dish towel. I stood there quietly, waiting. Then my son spoke first, his voice calm but firm. "We need to talk, both of you." She froze slightly, then looked up. Her eyes were wide, uncertain. I could see a flicker of fear, but also something else. Maybe regret, maybe guilt, I wasn't sure yet. I took a slow, steadying breath. "I don't want to argue," I said softly. "I just want to understand why yesterday happened." She swallowed. Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper. "I don't know, I was frustrated. I shouldn't have, She trailed off, shaking slightly. I could feel my heart softening just a little. Her words weren't a full apology, but they were a start. "I know we both said things we didn't mean," I said gently. "But throwing soup, that hurt me, not just physically, but emotionally." She looked down, her hands twisting the towel. The silence that followed was heavy, but not in a frightening way. It felt like the moment before a storm breaks and the air feels electric with change. Then she spoke, her voice trembling. I didn't realize how much it would hurt you. I'm sorry. I nodded slowly. That small, quiet apology carried weight. It didn't erase what had happened, but it opened a door. My son stepped forward, placing a hand on her shoulder. It's okay, we can start fresh, but we have to respect each other. Always. She nodded, tears forming in her eyes. I will. I promise. I took a deep breath and felt the tension in my shoulders ease. For the first time, I realized that perhaps forgiveness doesn't always start with grand gestures. Sometimes it starts with a simple, quiet acknowledgement. A willingness to see the pain you've caused and the courage to admit it. We sat together after that, quietly sharing a few words. Not many. Just enough to bridge the distance that had grown between us. It wasn't perfect, but it was a beginning. Later that evening, I sat by the window watching the sunset. The sky was painted in soft golds and pinks, and I felt a deep, quiet gratitude. Gratitude for my son who had stood by me. Gratitude for a moment of understanding between me and my daughter-in-law. Gratitude for the chance to breathe again without the weight of yesterday pressing on my chest. Sometimes I realized life doesn't hand us perfect resolutions. It hands us moments, small, fragile moments, where hearts can start to heal. And that evening, as the sky darkened softly into night, I felt that healing begin. The following days were gentle but deliberate. I stayed at my son's house, taking small steps toward normalcy. I didn't rush to return to my own home. I didn't rush to forgive fully. But I began to notice little changes, small gestures that carried weight far beyond their size. She began speaking to me quietly, cautiously. At first it was just small words, good morning or do you want some tea? But each word felt like a bridge, slowly reconnecting us. She watched for my reactions, as if testing whether the space between us was safe to cross. I realized that sometimes relationships need these quiet, careful moments to heal. They don't always need long speeches or dramatic apologies. They need awareness, intention, and small acts that show respect and care. One afternoon, she brought a small tray with tea and biscuits. Her hands were slightly trembling, and I could see the uncertainty in her eyes. I smiled gently. Thank you, I said. She hesitated, then spoke softly. Ami, I am truly sorry for what happened. I didn't mean to hurt you. I nodded slowly. Her words weren't perfect. They weren't enough to erase the memory of yesterday, but they were enough to start repairing what had broken. Enough to remind me that people are capable of change, even when they stumble in moments of anger. Over the next week, the atmosphere in the house shifted gradually. Meals were shared again, conversations flowed more easily, and laughter returned, not loudly, not always fully free, but enough to remind us all that the heart can still feel warmth, even after being wounded. I began to see her differently. Not just as my daughter-in-law, but as someone who was learning, just like me. She had made a mistake, yes, but she was also trying to make it right, and I could meet her halfway without denying the hurt, without pretending it didn't exist. My son watched silently as we navigated this slow reconciliation. He never pressured either of us. He simply reminded us that family is not perfect, but it can still be loving. He reminded us that understanding sometimes requires patience, and forgiveness sometimes grows in the quiet spaces between words. One evening, as we sat together after dinner, she finally spoke again, more confidently this time. Ami, can you forgive me? I looked at her. The tremor in her voice was gone, replaced by a quiet sincerity. I felt my own chest loosen. Yes, I said softly, I forgive you. Her eyes filled with tears, and I could see the relief in her face. Not just relief for being forgiven, but relief for being seen. Relief for knowing that despite the conflict, the care between us could survive. From that moment, the tension that had gripped my heart began to lift. It didn't disappear completely. Some memories linger as they always do. But the sharp pain dulled into something bearable, something that reminded me how fragile and how strong family can be. I realized that the day's events were not only about anger or mistakes, they were about understanding, about learning to navigate the rough edges of relationships with patience and grace, about remembering that love, when it is steady, can hold space for mistakes, for growth, for repair. In the evenings, we began sharing small moments together. Tea by the window, quiet conversation about our days, laughter over simple memories. I felt my heart soften toward her. and I felt a deeper gratitude for my son, who had guided us gently, without judgment, allowing us both to find our way back to each other. One night, as I sat near the window, watching the sky darken and the stars begin to appear, I felt a quiet peace settle over me. Life is not always smooth, it is not always fair, and sometimes it can be painful in ways that leave you questioning everything, but it is also capable of healing, capable of understanding, capable of moments where hearts can reconnect, even after hurt, even after anger, even after fear. And in that quiet moment, I realized that forgiveness is not just a gift for the person who hurt you. It is a gift for yourself, a way to release the weight that pain and disappointment leave behind. I closed my eyes and whispered a small prayer of thanks, for patience, for love, for the gentle resilience of hearts that are willing to heal. And for the first time in many days, I felt calm, truly calm. The days that followed felt lighter, though I still carried the memory of that afternoon like a quiet shadow. But the shadow no longer weighed me down. It was there as a reminder, not a burden. Life had reminded me that even in pain, there can be growth, and even in anger, there can be understanding. I began noticing small joys again, morning sunlight spilling across the living room, the gentle hum of our conversations, the comfort of a warm cup of tea in my hands. Even the sound of laughter, soft and careful, made its way back into the house. Each little moment felt precious, a reminder that healing doesn't always happen all at once, but gradually, with patience and care. I watched my son closely, seeing the way he quietly bridged the gap between us. He didn't force reconciliation, he didn't push for apologies, he simply created space for understanding and love to return, and I realized that sometimes the strongest acts of love are the quietest ones. One evening, as the sky turned soft shades of gold and pink, I found myself sitting by the window, reflecting on everything that had happened, the hurt, the fear, the anger. They had been real and they had stung deeply. But I also realized something else. The strength of family lies not in perfection, but in the willingness to stand together through the storm, to face the difficult moments, and to slowly find our way back to one another. I thought about my daughter-in-law. I didn't pretend the past never happened. I didn't ignore the pain, but I chose to see her as someone capable of change, someone who could learn from her mistakes. And in seeing that, I found a measure of peace for myself too. Sometimes, life doesn't give us neat endings. It doesn't hand us closure on a silver plate, but it gives us moments, fragile, fleeting, yet full of possibility. Moments where hearts can soften, where understanding can bloom, and where love can quietly return. As I closed my eyes that night, I whispered a quiet prayer, not just for myself, but for the people I love. A prayer for patience, a prayer for courage, a prayer for hearts to remain open, even after they've been hurt. And in that soft, still night, I felt a warmth spread through me. A quiet assurance that no matter what challenges may come, no matter what conflicts may arise, there is always a chance to begin again, to rebuild, to forgive, to love. I realized at last that life is not about never being hurt. It is about how we respond, how we heal, and how we allow compassion to guide us forward. And with that thought, I finally felt a gentle peace settle into my heart, a peace that carried the promise of brighter mornings, calmer days, and the quiet joy of family bonds that, though tested, can survive and even grow stronger with patience, understanding, and love. And as I drifted into sleep, I smiled softly, knowing that the heart, no matter how fragile it feels, has the power to heal, to forgive, and to love again.